Concessions workers at Oracle Park, the home of the San Francisco Giants, have voted overwhelmingly in favor of striking against what they call the park's inadequate and dangerously irresponsible COVID response. One Oracle Park cook said, quote, "I don't think we're asking for too much. They make a lot of money because of us." Negotiations that have taken place since the vote have so far been unsuccessful. A strike could be called at any time. Alex Shultz, San Francisco Gate sports editor, joins us now for more details on this imminent strike. Thanks so much for being here, Alex.
Thanks for having me.
So what is the dispute over currently, right at this moment?
Yeah, so there's a couple angles to this. The first is the COVID concerns at the ballpark. And actually, I should step back briefly. So the Giants don't actually directly employ these concessions workers. They are subcontracted by a group called Bon Appetit Management that also works with other food services groups, including the Golden State Warriors, the Bay. And so what's happening here is the workers have some labor grievances with Bon Appetit, but for the first time, really, they are also sort of bringing the Giants into this and saying, this is also on you. You're kind of passing the buck on to the subcontractor group. So they're concerned about COVID because it took until, I think, mid-August for Bon Appetit to tell workers that there had actually been 20 COVID cases amongst Ballpark concessions workers over the prior 2 months, which they were supposed to be regularly updating them about. And the concessions workers, represented by the local 2 union here of food service workers, are very upset about that for reasons that are fairly obvious. And they believe that's on the Giants, ultimately, because the Giants dictate the rules at the ballpark, at Oracle Park, about safety and health measures. And then the other parts of this are wages and pay. They want a wage increase. It's been 3 years since they got one previously, and they believe that because of the conditions and the safety conditions that they're exposed to during COVID, that they should be getting a raise. And separately, there's the healthcare issue, which frankly, in my reporting, I found to be the most galling, which is the only way that these workers are eligible for healthcare is if they work 10 events per month. And during the pandemic, there are not a lot of supplementary events beyond the Giants games at Oracle Park. So it's really hard to hit that mark. And if you don't hit the 10 events every month, you don't have healthcare the next month. And so it is a very weird dynamic that they want to go back to the negotiating table to discuss.
Utterly barbaric. I saw in some of your reporting that there are 9 events scheduled every month, just underneath. It almost feels intentional, but then again, I don't think it could be because it's so little money, relative to what the stadium rakes in for them to actually make a decision this large around that. You've also reported that there's frustration about lax mask mandate enforcement. Can you talk a little bit about that? So people in private boxes and other people like that they just don't have the mask mandate enforced, and is that what the workers are upset about?
Yeah, look, I mean, if we're going to be honest with, I think how the situation probably unfolded when the MLB season started back in April-ish, the pandemic, especially getting into May and June, the pandemic was receding a little bit, especially in the Bay Area. It was one of the safest places in the country. And so I think for a while, especially the ballpark is mostly open, people were pretty lax, including the Giants, about enforcing those rules. And I can't speak to how the concessions workers felt at that point, but they didn't know that there were COVID cases ongoing because Bon Appetit wasn't telling them. And so this all kind of came to a head in August when they found out about these 20 cases over the prior 2 months. And then they really started doing some soul searching of like, well, hey, for the last couple of months, when we're serving concessions, none of the fans wear masks in front of us, even though they're supposed to have done that. Especially, and then, if you're indoors at any point, if you're in one of the boxes upstairs or whatever, and those are indoors, people have not been wearing masks at all. So
does the stadium require people to be vaccinated to attend?
They do not. And actually, I did a story a couple of weeks ago about that issue. I reached out to all the Bay Area teams since the Bay was one of the first, like pretty much every restaurant and bar you go in here now, they want you to show proof of vaccination. And I asked all the teams, if they were thinking about going to that. But so far, only the Warriors have done that because they're an indoor venue, and the state now does mandate that. The Giants declined to do that, and from what I understand, the union, Local 2, did bring this point up when they spoke to the Giants last week, and the Giants were not interested in discussing a proof of vaccination.
It seems like that would be the best way to kind of neuter some of these concerns about lax masking. So that's interesting.
I agree. I think the easiest compromise would be to make sure everyone in the ballpark is vaccinated, and that would alleviate a lot of the concerns, especially if you're talking about San Francisco, which has one of the highest vaccination rates in the country already. Right. I don't think it would upset a whole lot of people in the Bay Area.
Well, there are reporters in San Francisco who are telling me that they're actually questioning all of that because with San Francisco actually, and maybe this is what the Giants are kind of seeing as well, is that even with the vaccine mandates before you can enter businesses, and even with the supposed high rate of vaccination in San Francisco, the businesses are suffering. They're not getting the patrons in, which is really odd. Some of the reporters are saying that when they just lifted everything before they had vaccine mandates, it was like everybody was going back to normal and feeling good and going out there. But then when they implemented, there seemed to be a slowing. I don't know if you're seeing that from your perspective, if you're going out and seeing that there's just not as many people out there. And so I wonder if they're really worried about the chilling effect that might have. What are you seeing?
I could only speak anecdotally to that as someone who is, occasionally going out to not super crowded bars and restaurants in San Francisco. I am vaccinated and seems normal-ish to me. I think with the ballparks, the issue and frankly, this is going to apply to all of the arenas that require proof of vaccination, is that it is a logistical nightmare, I think, to line up all the fans and make sure that they're scanning all their pass or whatever else. You're not talking about a bar with 100 people. You're talking about filling up an entire ballpark. So I'm sympathetic to a point to that, but I think ultimately that's on them to figure out. There is an NHL team now in Canada, I'm forgetting which one, but they already instituted a proof of vaccination plan for this coming NHL season. And as I mentioned, the Warriors are going to have to do it as mandated by the state. So this feels like one of those situations where this is part of adapting to Delta variant and the COVID pandemic, and I don't know about chilling effect insofar as ballpark attendance. The Giants are generally doing pretty well in terms of ballpark attendance this season, and they have the best record in baseball. So people are still coming to the games.
What's your sense of where this is headed? Do you think that the workers are going to have their demands met?
It's very hard to tell. I've kind of so they put out a statement last week, at the end of the week, after they negotiated with Bon Appetit management specifically, and then had a separate meeting with the Giants. And so at this point, they're watching out for two things. One is how this current homestand goes. They're back and working this week, and they want to see if the Giants come through on the promises they most recently made when they met with Local 2 union last week. They agreed to put up a much more signage around the ballpark about wearing your mask around concessions workers, and they're going to put some sort of enforcement mechanisms in to make sure that fans are actually masked up around the concessions workers. That's their main concern on the COVID front. So if the Giants uphold their end of the bargain there, that will, I think, allow them to get to next Tuesday, which is when they're supposed to go back to the bargaining table with Bon Appetit management. If the Giants don't uphold that end of the bargain, if concessions workers still feel really unsafe this week, I could see a strike starting imminently. If they get to next week, they're relatively hopeful about negotiations. I've been told that they made some good progress on some of their issues, but the one that they have not is healthcare. They're still very upset with that negotiation. They have not been able to get Bon Appetit management to come down off that 10 events per month limit. And in fact, Bon Appetit management, I think this was a separate issue, wants to raise workers' premiums. So not a very opportune time to make that push, I don't think.
Outrageous. Alex, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And we'll have more Rising for you right after this.